Well, good morning and welcome to the third annual Canada's Innovation Corridor Summit. My name is Eve McLean and I'm the President and CEO for the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce and the co-chair of Canada's Innovation Corridor Business Council. As with so many other businesses, in the past couple of months, we've had to pivot and adapt to a new normal. And today that means hosting our annual Innovation Corridor Summit as a virtual event rather than coming together in Waterloo Region. Although we are remote, it is more important than ever to establish a sense of community, continue to learn from our peers, and foster new connections. So it's truly a pleasure to see so many people taking time out of their busy schedules to support this year's event. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment just to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on the foundation of mutual understanding and respect. Canada's Innovation Corridor Business Council was established in 2015 to put our world-leading research, innovation, and businesses into action so that our communities can scale for local, national, and international commercial opportunities. Further progress will be driven by ensuring the right talent is in place so our businesses across sectors within the corridor can grow over the next 5 years. Today's summit is focused on talent fueling innovation. Talent is needed for further research to be translated into commercial applications for business and governments and is the key driver to develop technologies, jobs, and new companies of the future. I'd also like to thank our sponsors of today's event, and without their support, this program would not be possible. So to our presenting sponsor, I want to thank the entire team at Gallings WLG. We appreciate their continued support as our presenting sponsor. Our podium sponsor is Rogers. And thank you to our topic sponsors, Deloitte and Manulife. Our networking sponsor today has been Huawei Canada, and we appreciate their support. The keynote sponsors today have been the University of Waterloo and Wilfrid Laurier University. Our municipal leader sponsors, Tsunami, the Region of Waterloo, the City of Brampton, and the City of Hamilton. Our summit supporter sponsors today have been OpenText, Home Hardware, the City of Guelph, and Toyota. Please join us in thanking these incredible sponsors by adding a thumbs up or a thank you in the chat box. As this is likely a new platform for many of you, I would like to go over a few important items and reminders. At any time, you can visit the reception page to learn more about our event sponsors and to view the event schedule. You'll also notice in the navigation panel on the left that it indicates which part of the event is currently live. This will help you guide you through the event so you don't miss any important updates or event content. Today's formal program has been pre-recorded and split into 3 video segments that will all appear on the main stage. You can refer to the schedule on the reception page at any time to see when the next video segment will become available. Between video segments on the main stage, you'll move to our live networking break, which includes networking with other attendees and visiting the exhibitors within the expo. Next, we want to encourage you to make the most of your virtual event experience by participating in networking to make new connections and learning more about the incredible businesses that we have today in our virtual expo. We hope you have had time to visit some of them already this morning and continue to encourage you to visit them throughout the day. The exhibitors will be in their booths during all the live engagement breaks, allowing you to talk with most exhibitors directly through live video chat. When talking to exhibitors, don't forget to complete the passport in your event program for a chance to win one of our incredible prizes. When you are networking, we encourage you to dive right into the conversation when the chat begins. You will notice that there is a time limit on each networking conversation before you are matched with someone new. When you're networking, you'll also notice a big blue connect button. If you wish to follow up with your new connection following the event, you should both click the connect button to exchange virtual business cards. If you run out of time and want to continue the conversation with your new connection right away, you can message the individual directly through the People tab on the right and request a private meeting. Finally, if you have any questions throughout the day during your virtual event experience, we'd be happy to help answer them. You can either post your question in the event chat, which you will find on the right-hand side of your screen, or you can visit the Sessions tool in the navigation panel on the left-hand side, where you'll find the Help Desk. And at the help desk, you can speak to a live representative of our chamber team who can help you navigate the platform at any time during the event. We really hope you do enjoy today's Canada Innovation Corridor Summit. Thank you again for your continued support. I'd like to now introduce my co-chair of Canada's Innovation Corridor Business Council and the president and CEO of the Toronto Region Board of Trade, Janet De Silva.
Ian, thanks so much. Welcome to Canada's Innovation Corridor Summit, hosted by Ian McLean and his amazing team at the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce, and presented for the third year in a row by our great partner, Gowling WLG. Founded by a coalition of 12 chambers from municipalities comprising Canada's Innovation Corridor, the summit is intended to galvanize action on opportunities and challenges impacting Canada's largest economic zone. We share a goal to make the corridor one of the most competitive and sought-after business regions in the world. A year ago, the corridor was on a trajectory of growth. It represented the fastest growing city and metropolitan region in the United States and Canada. Fueled by innovation, immigration, and a talented workforce, it was home to nearly 8 million residents and more than 3 million jobs. It was not an exaggeration to say we were having a moment when it came to growth, global brand recognition, and attention. Earlier this year, the corridor, along with the rest of the world, was halted by COVID-19, the biggest health and economic crisis in nearly a century. The corridor's rapid growth came to a standstill. Assembly lines shut, along with Main Street restaurants, schools, and businesses of all sizes. Overnight, hotel occupancies dropped to all-time lows, and long-standing entertainment and sports venues emptied. Between February and June 2020, the corridor lost 468,000 jobs. So today's summit, happening in the midst of the most serious global public health and economic crisis in nearly a century, has never been more important. Our discussion today is on talent and the future as we turn our sights to reopening with COVID in our midst. The strengths and talent that fueled our corridor pre-pandemic provide us with an incredible foundation for reimagining our recovery. So thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights and participation have never been more needed or valued. And to get us started, it's my pleasure to welcome our presenting sponsor, Gowling WLG. Joining us is Gowling Senior Partner, Bryce Craker. Bryce, over to you.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the third annual Innovation Corridor Summit. My name is Bryce Craker, and I'm the managing partner of Gowling WLG's Waterloo Region office. On behalf of Gowling WLG, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this year's virtual event. Today's summit gives us a moment to pause and reflect on our achievements, to examine the new challenges and opportunities that we face today, and to look to the future of creativity, collaboration, and commercialization. Although we were excited to host all of you in Waterloo this year, this online format has given us the opportunity to welcome innovators from across Canada, more broadly showcasing the groundbreaking work being done in the Innovation Corridor. It's no secret that the Innovation Corridor has undergone a remarkable transformation in recent years. From unprecedented advances in automotive research and medical technology to exciting new models of collaboration across diverse sectors, the Waterloo, Hamilton, and Toronto regions continue to push Canada's innovation economy into the global spotlight. The Innovation Corridor is home to over 15,000 tech companies and approximately 200,000 tech workers, all of which is fueled by 16 post-secondary education institutions training over 423,000 students. We are the second fastest growing tech talent market in North America. And as some of you may know, Gowling WLG is the only international law firm with a major presence throughout the Innovation Corridor. With full-service offices in Hamilton, Waterloo, and Toronto, these local teams are backed by a network of more than 1,400 professionals in 19 offices around the world. Every day, our professionals make vital new connections, helping pioneering startups bring their ideas to life and guide established companies in the tech and advanced manufacturing sectors through the next stages of their growth. We harness our local partnerships and international network to ensure that innovators here have access to the network and resources and expertise that they need anywhere in the world to turn big dreams into commercial reality. In doing this, we have experienced firsthand the strength, ingenuity, and limitless potential of the Innovation Corridor, where we are proud to work closely with all of you in mobilizing the potential and accelerating the continued success of our region. None of this, of course, would be possible without people, and that's why we're here today. We know that for our clients in the Innovation Corridor, talent is everything. However, I'm sure all of you would agree that cultivating a workforce that can execute visionary ideas is often easier said than done. From nuanced employment contracts and incentives to immigration hurdles, complex matters around intellectual property rights, building and retaining a diverse, high-performing team can be a challenge, but it's a challenge that's worth facing. Over the last 6 months, our employment group has been working around the clock, advising our clients on every aspect of managing their workforce during a pandemic, focused most recently on how to keep employees safe and productive as the economy reopens. As individuals, we all bring something different. Each of us brings unique strengths and perspectives to the table. When we work together, we integrate all of these skills and experiences to achieve even more. And this is where innovation is born. Actively and mindfully recruiting people with complementary and diverse talents broadens our expertise and enhances our performance as an organization. And it sets the stage for building an innovation culture that permeates every aspect of our business. We are stronger when we work together. This statement forms the bedrock of our firm and underscores why Canada's Innovation Corridor Summit is such an integral event for our region. While all of us at Gowling WLG are currently working from home, we are looking forward to returning to the office in stages over the coming months. For those of you located in the Waterloo region, if you have driven in downtown Kitchener recently, you will have seen the beautiful new office building that is nearing completion at 345 King Street. We are excited to move into our new home right in the heart of Kitchener's Innovation District next year, and we extend an open invitation to visit us when you are in town to see what we believe will be a leading example of a progressive legal workplace designed with our people and our clients first. Thank you once again for joining us today. In our sessions, we look forward to exploring how we can strengthen the Innovation Corridor through a lens of people and talent. I hope you enjoy. And now I'd like to introduce Deb McClatchy, the President and Vice Chancellor of Wilfrid Laurier University. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Deb McClatchy, President and Vice Chancellor of Wilfrid Laurier University. It's great to be with you virtually today and a real pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, the Honorable Lisa Raitt. My thanks to the Chamber for hosting this summit for the third year and for once again using its unique ability to bring together government, industry, academic, and community leaders to discuss issues of mutual importance for our region. This year's keynote speaker is especially suited to speak from the perspective of industry and government, having built a career that spans both, giving her a unique perspective to share with us on today's topic of fueling innovation with talent. As the first woman in Canadian history to hold the position of Harbour Master, Ms. Raitt moved quickly from being the Toronto Port Authority's Corporate Secretary and General Counsel to its President and CEO, leading the organization that controls the Toronto Harbour as well as the Toronto City Centre Airport. Entering federal politics in 2008, she represented the ridings of Halton and Milton, holding a number of cabinet positions in the Harper government, including Minister of Natural Resources, Minister of Labour, Minister of Transport, and eventually Deputy Leader of the Conservative Opposition, another first for a Canadian woman. Those of you who know the former minister from social media know that she is an unfaltering supporter of women's engagement in politics. Now in private life, her current role is Vice Chair of Global Investment Banking at CIBC Capital Markets. In a few moments, the former minister will be speaking with Ian McLean, President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, about how investments in talent and human capital are fueling innovation at CIBC. That topic, fueling innovation with talent, especially resonates with me as someone whose role is to ensure university graduates are future ready and prepared for whatever challenges the future brings. And if there has ever been a time when a laser-sharp focus on future readiness has been critical, it is now. At Wilfrid Laurier University, we work with our community and business partners to develop talent who can inject new ideas and creativity into our local economy to further expand impact in Ontario's innovation corridor. I'm looking forward to hearing how CIBC, a valuable partner to Laurier through supports for women in finance and innovative immersive learning, is navigating these particularly challenging times and to what extent they are building future talent and capacity for innovation. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming this morning's keynote speaker, the Honourable Lisa Raitt.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Deb, and we certainly appreciate the support of Laurier in this event. Lisa, it's always a pleasure to welcome you back, although virtually, here to Waterloo Region. Certainly strange times, but your resume and your career is impressive, to say the least. You know, whether you're in private sector and as the CEO of the Toronto Port Authority, as multiple cabinet posts that you held federally, the deputy leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, and that was the last time you joined us, was just before the election.
Yeah.
But now joining us as the vice chair of CIBC Global Banking, it's a pleasure to have you, and we appreciate you taking the time to join the Innovation Corridor Summit 2020.
Well, I only live up the road from the corridor, and I have a son who's in second year of finance, so I want to make sure I'm keeping tabs on what you guys are up to as well, Ian. I have to say, I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing there. So I was really happy to be asked, and I'm delighted to be here today.
Well, as we start the day, one of the reasons I was pleased that you took up our invitation is to give some context to what we're talking about today. Obviously, talent fueling innovation is right across the country, frankly around the globe, but certainly in the Innovation Corridor, talent fuels the innovation that happens here. One of the things just before we got started, and I think this is as a positioning point, is when we think about COVID now, some people are ready to start talking about recovery. I know from our members and from people I talk to, I don't think we're through the crisis yet. And so maybe some context, as you and I were talking about that, is that there is crisis and there's a restart of the economy and there's recovery. Where do you think we are in that context?
I think we're at the beginning of trying to make work go back to normal, or whatever normal is going to be. And if it's not going to be normal, getting our heads around what it's going to look like, how we're going to conduct business. So to give you an example, in my role at CIBC, my job is to meet senior clients across the country. I'm supposed to be heading out to Calgary or going out to Nova Scotia to meet clients and talking to them about issues that they have, and just talking in general about the state of the economy. You can't do that. Everything is going to be via this kind of seminar, this kind of connection in a very visual way. We're getting used to that, but it's tiring. And if you take a look at what's being said around the world, fatigue sets in pretty quickly when you're doing 6 or 7 Zoom meetings. You may think you can cram it all in, but you have to be able to pay attention. You have to be able to think on your feet. It's a very, very different world than it was before. So that's why I believe that although companies are opening and businesses are opening and it feels better than being locked down, quite frankly, the reality is that we're just starting to figure out what a pre-vaccine world is going to look like. And I believe fundamentally that talent acquisition and talent retention are going to be more important than ever. And we start with the basic premise: talent is your innovation. It's the younger people coming in who are going to give us the great ideas that are going to move us to the next level. And if we don't either get them or keep them, we get problems.
Well, and just before we dive in, because we're going to talk about some of what you think are some of the emerging trends, and so there's a series of things we want to talk about there. One of the things I found as we were getting ready for this that I found interesting is, and because I happen to agree with this as well, and maybe this is from political or customer facing backgrounds, how you treat people, particularly when you're in the worst of times, is really important, because how you treat your staff, your customers, your interns, in your human capital is going to be remembered as we come out the other side. And the other one, because I will get to some of that, but immigration and the importance of the human capital that's going to be needed for innovation here in Ontario and across the country. Talk a little bit about that, because I think that's an overarching theme of Canada relies on immigration and immigrants and newcomers to our country to you know, and always have to build our country.
Well, two things I would say to that is I think the whole world has stopped moving in a sense. So there's not a lot of people moving around from relocating from one country to another for their career, for their next job. And in fact, the immigration numbers that were released in August were really clear about that, Ian. They said that we had seen a huge drop in the number of people who are receiving permanent residency. And that's going to be a shrunk bubble, right? That is, you're not going to make that up by allowing 600,000 people in next year. That is going to be one of those data points in 2020 that is going to show up for years and years to come in terms of the cohort of 2020 that we would have expected to come in. That has an economic impact. And that's why the drop rate now is important. But as you said before we came on, we're experiencing it worldwide. So everyone's kind of in the same boat, which brings me to the second point for me. I believe that Canada has enjoyed a great reputation on the world stage. And I was actually really tickled, and I thought it was very, very clever when I heard about billboards going up in Silicon Valley, California, saying, come to Canada, you know, we're doing better with COVID, everything's better up here. And you know, there's a lot of reasons why people may want to relocate to Canada. They may reflect upon their own political issues in the United States and determine they want to go somewhere else for healthcare, for democracy, for whatever, you know, is floating their boat at the time. But here's the thing, there's a presidential election this year, and all of that can turn like that, which means you're only as good as a president for the policies that are directing the country in one way or the other. So Canada can't rely upon a negative impression of the US in the greater world to want to go and further your career. In fact, we have to start thinking again about the US being our greatest competitor for worldwide talent. So you got to start thinking about it now. We don't know how that election's going to go. So assuming we're going to get people coming up because of turmoil, I don't think that's a good business plan. I think people should be thinking right now about how do we make ourselves more attractive in Canada.
So as we think about how we interact with and getting to those emerging trends as it relates to talent, one of the things that again we talked about before we came on is that there's the reopening or the crisis, and we're starting to restart and then looking to the recovery. The things that's really dependent on are safety. Does your customer feel safe? Does your staff feel safe? Do they feel secure? Both personally and as far as health's concerned, and then you know, how does the everyday, what is the new everyday look like? So when we look to customer service and what the coronavirus has really kind of jumbled up what people's expectations are around how they're treated by the services that they need. Maybe pick up on how you think that's going to affect business, not just obviously in the bank, but for businesses across the board.
Sure. I mean, everybody is a client. Everybody has a client. So client interface is going to be incredibly important going forward. And as you point out, the rules have changed. Before, it was about hunting for that best deal, either in terms of not paying as much as you want for a product or getting better service than you expected you were going to get. It's not about that anymore. And you're right. It's about safety and security at the very top in terms of people as they try to find their way forward in managing what their business is. In my area, and I think in all professional institutions, I think we have to also remember to have a little bit of empathy for the people that work with us and who work for us. Now, I'm in my 50s. I have a house. I live outside the city core. But I look at somebody like my son, who is, as I mentioned before, he's going into second year of university. His dream is to work in a big city or a medium-sized city and start off with a roommate in an 800 square foot condo. Now imagine that all of a sudden this pandemic starts and that 800 square foot condo is everything. It's where you eat, it's where you sleep, and it's where you work. And that is not conducive for anybody. So there has to be a little bit of empathy that is present. You got to put yourself in the shoes of the client, put yourself in the shoes of the person who works for you, put yourself in the shoes of the business that you're interacting with to try to get an understanding of what this impact had, well, COVID, what impact COVID has had on how they would normally do business. Normal's out the door. You have to actually enable yourself to think what other people are experiencing and then meet their needs where they are, because their needs have changed.
I'm going to pick up on a thread there, we'll probably do it now. What you talked about, that empathy thing, is also tied into mental health, right? And saying, you know, you can't be innovative, you can't be figuring out what the next thing is if you're mentally you're not feeling safe and secure. I mean, that empathy would translate not only to your own staff and the people you're trying to recruit as talent fueling your own business, but your customers are probably feeling that too.
Absolutely. And think about it. I mean, usually in the summertime, people will take vacations to go out and recharge themselves physically and mentally. I mean, you know yourself, Ian, it takes 3 days at the very least to unwind before you start really enjoying yourself in a vacation. How many of you folks out there really can say you took a week-long, 2-week-long vacation this summer, that you weren't looking at your emails or checking up on what was going on for 2 reasons? One, you felt the expectation was there, but secondly, you didn't have really much else to do. You can sit in the backyard, you can go to the cottage, you can go on day trips, but the reality is that there wasn't a lot for people to fully distance themselves from their work. So I think mental health is a big deal, understanding, cutting each other slack, giving a little bit of time. And it's the companies and the managers who remember that when they're dealing with their really super high achievers. They're the ones that are going to win at the end of the day and retain that talent and then get the reputation that, hey, you know what, they're good people to work for. Look what they did this is how they reacted in the pandemic. I trust them and I believe in them.
So as we think about you know, in the banking business, the CIBC, and looking across global markets, maybe talk a little bit about some of the importance of agility in responding to customer experiences, because I know early on in this, and we were talking about it as we were having some technical difficulties while we were doing this, getting set to do this recording. But one of the things that came out is early on, when everyone suddenly started to need to work from home, it didn't all work right away. And so some were better at of others of being responsive, being more agile. That's going to be incredibly important, not just during this pandemic, but moving forward.
Well, I feel it was a good time for me to get into investment banking because it's not about hunting for mergers and acquisitions anymore. What it is about is adding value. So being able to talk about supply chain, which I can do, being able to talk about US-Canada trade relationships, that's something I can do as well. Those kinds of insights are going to be beneficial for clients and keeping on top of what's going on and engaging in conversations. And why I bring it up is this: when the pandemic hit, people were worried about their businesses and they were worried about what was going to happen to them, but they were also wondering what was going on in the world in general. And I found that folks wanted to have deeper conversations on different topics, not necessarily keeping it to business only. You took a breath, you had a little bit of time to get into topics of conversation that were a little bit different. And that to me was a revelation, because it showed that at the end of the day, business is still human connection. And you have to facilitate the human connection. One way we facilitate it is through this technology, But the technology, as you and I discovered before we came on, it's got to be frictionless, because otherwise you're going to be really frustrated. So having the right tech, listening to your customer about what works and what doesn't work in technology for them, helping them. If think about all those seniors out there, for example, who can't access online banking, and it became really the only way that you could do your banking. There is a lot of help that was going to be needed for those folks out there. And I'm sure that all the banks adapted and ended up trying to help in the best way that they could. That's the agility, that's the nimbleness, that's understanding your client, your customer. And it wasn't just here, it was globally around the world.
Just picking up on that, there were some things that you had to do your banking and you had to do some things. So those were the most immediate things where clients' behavior actually changed because there was an immediacy and an urgency to that. But how do you keep, I mean, I imagine that what we would see is that there's going to be innovation / change in many parts of the economy, just because the innovation and the reality of what we've been through has said we should do things differently. How do you, as client behavior or your business behavior needs to change, how do you, because some of that's not the immediacy of it, it's just the natural evolution or the natural innovation that's going on. Where do you see that going?
I think clients are going to expect more, to be honest. One of the things that I found fascinating was the fact that hours got shortened at every business across the country when you were in stage 1 or stage 2, or however you labeled your different reopening strategies across the country. And still, here we are, and there's a lot of places that have not returned to the normal business hours that we had all anticipated, which means, did you need to have all those hours? And is there going to be a new normal when it comes to that kind of experience and that kind of ease of accessibility? So I think that is one thing to watch for. I also believe fundamentally that folks are going to be very much looking for different experiences. The way that we interacted before is gone. We're not all going to go to a Jays game, because it's just, you're not going to go to a concert. You're not going to be able to do those things, but we still crave that interaction and we still crave that connection. And now I'm talking not only about clients, but as well team building within your own group. We're going to have to figure out ways to interact that allow you to be in close connection, but still socially distant from one another, and come up with unique, innovative ways to develop those human connections again. And the takeaway for me is business is incredibly important, but business is fueled by innovation, but talent innovation is anchored in human relationships. And that became very apparent, that how you are going to treat the people, how are you going to interact with people, those are the things that we're going to innovate and think about in the coming days.
As we think about, when you think about client and the effort that they need to connect with you, and they've got more anxiety around maybe going out. One of the things that I found interesting is, when you look at the provincial government and renewing your license as an example, you talked about it. Some of the changes have already been made. We're saying we had no choice but to say, do we need to be, in terms of the hours being open and how you are delivering some of those services. That's in the government sector where there's innovation occurring. But maybe talk a little bit about how you're updating your own policies or your own processes as a company, because you're going to have to innovate that to react to both your own talent and your customers.
Yeah. Well, obviously, there's always going to be attrition in a lot of companies. And for us at the bank, it's not only important to make sure you're acquiring fresh new talent, either through the immigration system or through coming straight out of university. We take interns, we take first-year associates. And, we didn't stop that at CIBC. We actually had the summer interns come in. Unfortunately, they were handed a laptop and they stayed at home. Which I'm sure wasn't a great experience as it could have been for them, their first real intern summer kind of job. But, the reality is they had security in knowing that we stood behind the offers that were made. And the same thing for first year associates. Those folks coming in are not going to get the kind of experience that they have. So you want to retain the people that you have as well. So as you go up through the ranks, Yeah, you really do have to think about the ways in which you're going to be interacting. And we seem to be going over the same ground over and over again. But I can't emphasize enough that when you take a look at the policies that you have in your company, make sure you're looking at it from the perspective of how it impacts the people that are there. Don't necessarily assume that this is a great job, therefore everyone's going to want to have that great job. Maybe the job is great and the pay is great, but the reality is that the working experience is such in this new world that it makes it impossible to enjoy it. And I found that at CIBC, what I was very proud of and very impressed with is they have a junior advisory committee, and that junior advisory committee is very much empowered to bring forward suggestions and really bringing forward the facts on the ground of what it's like to work from home and what it's like to be not connected with the team anymore physically, and what they anticipate and expect going forward. So in terms of our policies, absolutely taking a look at everything from client interaction to interaction with our own associates and interaction amongst partners, how to present on video, how to make sure that you're making your clients as comfortable as possible in dealing with them in a safe and secure way. So yeah, it's been a lot of administrative work, but as well a great rethink of how to serve your client and how to serve your people.
One of the, and we're coming to the end of our time. I wish we had more time, but wanted to kind of maybe end off two more questions. One relating to, success with clients. Our friends at Communitech, while they're really helping startups and scale-ups and tech companies, really focus with those companies of saying you still you gotta sell what you're creating, and you have to have clients, and preferably happy clients. What's the importance? I mean, I guess that's an age old. If you have happy clients, they'll talk to others. It's probably your best referral. But happy clients now, especially now, are going to be really important. So all the things we've talked about, being agile and responsive and creative, innovative, I mean, that's going to be incredibly important as the economy is in the slower state that it is right now.
Yeah, that's true. And there's a difference between a happy and a satisfied client and a client that trusts you. And what really became apparent over the past 6 months, because it's been 6 months of this pandemic, is that people turn to those who they trusted, not just those who did a great deal or a great job on this last project that we worked on together, but somebody that you really did, have a connection with in terms of, yeah, I like their advice and I think they give good advice. Not just underscores and shows that the value that you put into your client is as well making sure that you have a great connection in trust. You're as good as your last project. They may be happy with the project, but at the end of the day, do they really trust you for the advice that they're going to need going forward? And if something like this happens again, who do they turn to in the time of need? And that's kind of where my head is right now in terms of developing relationships. But it's easy for me. I'm a former member of parliament, right? So for me, knocking on doors, I would hear about a person's individual circumstances and I would care about it and I'd want to help them along. And the empathy part was really built in as part of it. And I didn't think it was going to fit in the business world. And I'm happy to see that some of the most successful people that I've encountered in banking at all banks have been the ones that had those really solid relationships with their clients, and they in the time of need they were able to help them out. And I'm sure lawyers can say that, and accountants, project managers, IT specialists, all that stuff.
Listen, last question, and I think we'll bring it back to this, which is it's a global pandemic that we're in. A lot of these things are that we've discussed are on innovation and talent and how to kind of get through it and plan for the future. I guess we can never forget that we live next door to the United States of America, and they're in the middle of a presidential election. And so I won't put you on the spot who will or won't win, but what's the important things that we need to take away from our perspective? Because it doesn't matter what happens politically, we need to continue to innovate and be leader globally in as many ways as we can. Maybe just draw a connection between what's happening there and what's happening here.
No, it's a great question too. And I think the overall piece of advice that I would give to Canadians, and I take myself, quite frankly, and I as well in business too, when it comes to managing people, is to don't be smug. Don't assume that everyone is going to want to work for you because it's a steady job and jobs are scarce right now. Don't make that assumption. Don't be smug. There may be all kinds of other things going on in that person's mind in terms of what they value in a company. And the same thing with the United States. Canadians, we can't afford to be smug. And I'll tell you the true story. And it's a funny one. So back 4 years ago, when Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton faced off against one another, the then ambassador to Canada from the United States rented out the Royal. It would be the Chateau Laurier. It was in Ottawa, the Chateau Laurier ballroom, for a celebratory party, because the assumption was Hillary Clinton was going to win, and the ambassador was a big supporter of Hillary Clinton. And as the night rolled on, and the cabinet ministers were there from the Liberal government, and the reporters were there, as the night rolled on, and people stopped being as jovial as they were. And when it was announced that Donald Trump had won, reporters immediately started looking for cabinet ministers to get commentary from. And the reason being is no one anticipated it, no one expected it. So in terms of dealing with the United States, I would say that have a plan A and a plan B, a strategy A and strategy B. Don't assume that we know what's going to happen, and don't assume that because somebody gets elected, they're naturally going to do something in this field. So a lot of people like to say, if Joe Biden's elected, then we're going to be going forward in the environment, and we're going to be having higher taxes. I wouldn't make those assumptions, because we don't stand in their shoes in terms of what they want to accomplish as a country. Same thing, if Donald Trump gets elected, it's going to be better for Wall Street. I don't know if it's going to be better for Wall Street. So make sure that in this time of uncertainty, that you really are ready to pivot and be agile in terms of whichever way this is going to go. And quite frankly, don't pick a side. If you don't have a vote in this election, don't pick a side.
Listen, that's probably good advice. Hey, thank you so much for you're always generous, as I said off the top, with your time for us here in Waterloo Region. We do appreciate it. Lisa, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you for that insightful fireside discussion, Lisa and Ian. It is great to hear industry leaders continuing to focus on client needs, especially in these challenging times. Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Parsons-Demija, and I'm a Deloitte partner with responsibility for the Southwestern Ontario marketplace, which in our definition is from Mississauga to Niagara and from Guelph to Windsor. It is my absolute pleasure to be here today, as Deloitte has been a key supporter and participant of the Innovation Corridor Summit since its inception 3 years ago. Talent and the future of work are topics that are near and dear to my heart. As a partner in our human capital practice, I work with my clients every day on how organizations need to stay ahead in the changing world of work. As Canada and the rest of the world look to rebuild after the pandemic, it is more critical than ever for Canadian leaders to rethink talent and prepare for a future-ready workforce. I look forward to the upcoming presentations and discussions we will be hearing at today's summit on these very topics. Now it is my pleasure to introduce you to the summit's next segment. Please welcome Shakiba Shayani, the President and CEO of the Guelph Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, Catherine. Today's event wouldn't be possible without the contributions of our partners. We're pleased to have Deloitte support today's event. Thank you. I'm Shakiba Shayani, the President and CEO of the Guelph Chamber of Commerce. I'm pleased to be here today as a member of Canada's Innovation Corridor Business Council. Guelph proudly participates in the collaboration that exists in this unified economic zone. Our 2019 Smart Cities Win, a project about creating Canada's first circular food economy called Our Food Future, was made possible by the innovations that are able to be leveraged along this corridor. Regional connectivity is another shared agenda item. We actively advocate for two-way all-day go service, as we know that attracting and retaining diverse talent is a priority for our communities. It is now my pleasure to introduce the first esteemed group of presenters of the day, the Future of Work and Learning panel. Our first panelist is Val Walker, who leads the Business and Higher Education Roundtable. As CEO of the member-based not-for-profit organization, she sets the Roundtable's strategic direction and leads a strong team focused on building new opportunities in Canada's skills and innovation ecosystem through collaboration. Beyond this, Val serves as co-chair of the Future Skills Council, a group established by the Government of Canada to advise on national and regional skills development and training priorities. She also speaks and advises regularly on innovation and talent. Previously, Val was the Vice President, Innovation and Skills at the Business Council of Canada and Director of Policy at Mitacs. She holds a PhD from McGill University and is an alumna of the Government of Canada's Recruitment of Policy Leaders program. Our second panelist is Simon Chan. Simon is currently the Vice President, Talent Academy and Future of Work at Communitech, which is a private public innovation hub in Kitchener-Waterloo that supports a community of over 1,500 companies, from startups to scale-ups to large global players. He is responsible for the leadership of the Talent and Communitech Academy teams, who support talent attraction and learning and development programs and events for our member companies. He is also leading the development of a future of work and learning strategy for a coalition of multi-stakeholders, partners in Waterloo region to build a community of practice to help future-proof organizations. Prior to this role, Simon was head of corporate innovation thought leadership, where he worked with enterprise executive teams on their innovation strategy and building out their company-wide innovation system. Our third panelist is Katie Kitchen. Katie is one of those people who loves what she does. She loves business and helping people be their best. And when both happen together, it is magic. She's worked across many industries from public to private sector and held varying roles in the HR space, HR strategy, HR partnering, leadership, organizational development, and team interventions. Today, she's leading Manulife's HR team in Canada, helping Canadians' financial and health decisions be easier on their lives. She's also worked with Deloitte Consulting as an external consultant and for BlackBerry. Katie holds a Master's in Human Systems Intervention from Concordia and a BBA from Saint FX University in Nova Scotia. This discussion will be facilitated by Dr. Judine Preddy, who is a director of the Work-Learn Institute at the University of Waterloo. Judine leads a team that conducts and shares research related to the experiences and impacts of work-integrated learning programs for employers, students, and academic institutions. She is currently conducting research on how youth contribute toward organizational innovation through work-integrated learning and leads the development of an online national work-integrated learning resource hub. Recently, she has led a research team working with a Communitech consortium on the development of a scorecard to assess the readiness of communities for the future of work and learning. Judine is also an associate editor for the International Journal of Work Integrated Learning and the executive chair of the WACE International Research Community. Take it away, Judine.
Thank you for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today to facilitate the Future of Work and Learning panel for the summit. This is a very important topic, and our experiences in adapting to the COVID-19 pandemic have only amplified the importance of this conversation, and that's where we're going to start. Simon, can you comment on how COVID-19 has changed our collective perspectives around the future of work and learning?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting time we're obviously all living in. What seemed to be something, the future of work and learning, we started talking about that probably a little over a year ago. And what seemed like something that was going to happen over the next 5 or 10 years kind of happened just overnight. So we were, as COVID impacted us, as we were talking about where we move from the future of work, there was a lot of conversation about how the future of work has become the present of work, or the future of work is now. And I think one of the big changes from a collective perspective is just the attention and the recognition that the workplace is changing. Obviously, as many of us have gone to remote, that's kind of an immediate impact. But I think what it's begun to highlight is that the general subject of the workplace changing and workforce expectations have changed. And a bit of the differences between how employers really need to understand the various differences that each employees have around their workplace experience and how they need to reimagine that experience overall.
Yeah, thank you. Val, can you comment on how it's changed our perspectives on the future of work and learning?
Yeah, for sure. I think, what that question sounds like to me is really what's the new normal. And I know that term new normal is overused already, but but for me, to what extent are the adjustments that we're making right now in response to COVID permanent versus which ones will be temporary and will revert back to something from before once we get through this most immediate piece of the pandemic. And so, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think it's the right opportunity, like Simon said, to think about these adjustments that can be made to make the jobs of your employees easier, or at least adaptive or able to be adapted to more flexible work hours or locations. It does bring up, though, for employers, a lot of rethinking required about remote work, travel policies. How do you manage virtually? How do you onboard virtually? How do you hire virtually if it does keep online longer? So it's a good question. There's a lot in it that makes it a really complex thing to answer. But I'm glad that people are thinking about it now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And Katie, how about for you?
Yeah, so as an employer and a member of the Future of Work and Learning Coalition in Waterloo Region, there's a couple of things that we're starting to see from a trends perspective emerge, Judine. So one is mid-career employees are able to learn faster than they would have thought they could have otherwise, in very different skill sets. And we have many examples where that's taken place. The second piece is the importance of wellness. So mental wellness and physical wellness has come to the forefront and part of a conversation where it may have been ancillary before. Now it's part of the everyday vernacular that people are talking about, both in the workplace and in their communities. And what's interesting from an employment perspective, where job may have been a very big part of people's lives, COVID has allowed everybody time to sort of step back and think about what role do I want my job or my career to have in my life. And it's allowed for a bit of reflection. And as an employer and employees coming into the office, that may need to have some more further conversation as we move through into the new normal.
Okay, that's a really good point. And I think leads us nicely into a next question, which we've talked about, the expectations that employees might have or the situations that they're in and needing to navigate through this. But what skills are employers going to be looking for in this post-pandemic workplace? Katie, maybe we can start with you this time.
Yeah, sure. And I think, you know what, in all honesty, I don't know that they're that different than what they were pre-pandemic, which is a really nice thing to see too. We still look for employees who are curious, who have a mindset for innovation and customer centricity. What's interesting though, is we are asking for employees and colleagues to continue in teamwork. The way that looks in terms of collaboration and partnership, et cetera, is different now post-pandemic, as we may have colleagues working across the world. But what we're looking for really isn't that different.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And Val, do you have thoughts on that as well?
I agree 100% with Katie on that. As some of you might know, the Business Higher Education Roundtable works closely with the Business Council of Canada, so an industry association that has its members, Manulife included, about 150 of the biggest companies from across the country. And just a couple weeks ago, we released their biannual skills survey. To be clear, the data were collected last summer, so before the onset of the pandemic, but absolutely still, it says clearly that employers are looking for those. I definitely don't use the word soft skills, human skills, or those social and emotional skills, like Katie mentioned, teamwork, critical thinking, communication, problem solving, those types of things, and absolutely as critical, if not more so, in COVID, because the other layer with COVID is that we now are all working in an environment of collective anxiety, right, about our jobs, our families, and our futures. And so we're asking our employees right now to draw more than ever on those social and emotional skills to make sure that they are the skills that they need in order to help get through this and how they're going to adapt in whatever this quote unquote new normal looks like.
Right. Yes. Thank you. Simon, what have you been hearing that employers are going to be looking for post-pandemic, skill-wise?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of the same things that you've heard, and maybe the twist I would throw on it is, through the work we've done through the Future of Work and Learning, we've talked to obviously employers and employees, and I think the question that's being asked on both sides is, what does future ready mean? Like, what are the actual future ready skills? So we throw out terms like innovative, entrepreneurial mindset, et cetera. But what's a framework that we can all agree on that helps people understand that path from A to B, right? Like, how am I doing right now, as it relates to being future ready and the skills I need in the future, and what are the gaps and how can I move that forward. And I'll point to, some great work that University of Waterloo's done, Judine, right, around the Future Ready Talent Framework, and having a framework that just talks about what are the building blocks to be future ready. And I think there's an opportunity for us to help both the employers and employees come up with a high level definition around, in a common language around, what does it mean to be future ready, and then help people understand what steps they need to actually advance themselves through that. Because I think that's what I'm hearing, is that there's an appetite to develop skills. It's just, what do I do about it, and how do I know how I'm doing, and how can I advance those skills?
Yeah, good point. I think the perspective that I have from the context of work integrated learning students is when we ask them about the kinds of skills that have been most important, one of the things that has stood out to them, in addition to obviously communication and collaboration, which are taking place in different ways, is them talking about the need for self-direction. And while I think that might be something that we take for granted at sort of mid or later career, I think that is something that we're going to have to be thinking about with respect to newcomers to organizations and sort of the next generation of talent and how they will adapt to this remote working environment. So we've talked about those human skills or transferable skills. I wonder if you can comment from a recruitment perspective as far as in this working from home era, what is the value of those skills in the hiring process? Katie?
Sure, I can start the conversation. Val, I'm with you. I tend to use human-centric skills, Judine, as well, versus the soft skills language. So I think that's more appropriate given where we're at today. So we continue to hire. I know our coalition partners are certainly doing the same. And it's, when you're interviewing online, it's not that different than if you are in person. You still get a sense for an ability to build relationships, ability to share really great concrete examples of the work they've done and the potential the candidate has. What's interesting though is how do you onboard, right? So a lot of when we come into an organization is how do I build my network? How do I find out where to go for coffee and have those impromptu run-in connections with other colleagues? So onboarding, I think, is the biggest piece that we need to think about from a recruiting perspective as we move through the pandemic and hire more remotely.
Okay, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, I think about like the human skills that we've talked about. One of the ones that I would point to that's not necessarily a technical skill, but one is just around systems thinking, right? The ability, especially in a distributed environment, you don't have the visual cues, I guess, if you would to call it, to meet people from outside of, say, your business unit if you're working at a larger institution, but even in the community, right? And I think that's part of what we're trying to do with the coalition is to have individuals and organizations from other parts of the community be able to understand that there's common problems that cut across different stakeholders, and how to actually think more in a systems manner. That's at a community level, but at an organizational level, I think, coming into an organization, if you're new, you don't necessarily know the culture, et cetera. How do I think about what do I do in my particular business unit, and who else has those same common challenges across that business, so I can link it together. So you'll hear people think about, being customer focused or being empathetic. That's a centering mechanism, I guess, as a way of thinking, to think in a more system-wide manner for the customer. It could be a citizen, it could be a student, but I think that would be something that I think as we work more in a virtual environment, in a distributed environment, that we need to center people around those common challenges and help them understand outside of their silos, whether it be business unit or industry silos.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, very interesting. Thank you. Val, do you have thoughts on the value of these human skills during the hiring process?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat what Simon and Katie have already said, but I agree 100% with them, especially around the critical nature of empathy from the employer perspective. I think what I would add to complement is just, as much as we think a lot about the social and emotional skills or the transferable skills that we need to ensure employees have when we move to this virtual world, it's really important for employers to have and test where they are on their own social and emotional skills so that they can be good managers and good hiring managers through the hiring process, because that process is very different for people who are coming in looking for a job, whether it's their first job or a new job. And so it's just a good way to shine the light back on ourselves as employers to make sure that we first and foremost can show empathy for the person and the situation they're in. If they're coming in for an interview or like Katie referenced, that onboarding process, it's already pretty overwhelming to start a new job with people you don't know, and it's another leap forward to have to do that in a virtual way.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Thank you. So now we're going to shift and talk a little bit about education systems. So what would you say are the primary implications of the pandemic on post-secondary and secondary education systems? Val, maybe we can start with you.
Man, so this one's a big one. We could talk about this one for a long time, but in trying to think about being concise, I kind of would say two big things, Judine, in response to that. First, access and affordability. There was a StatsCan survey that came out just a few months ago in May, and it found that many students are reporting labor market disruptions this summer. So not shocking to anyone, but almost half reported either losing their job or being temporarily laid off since March. That's a big deal when it comes to affordability for students when they're worried about how they're going to pay for tuition. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say that is a big deal, I'm thinking mostly around post-secondary, I'm not as familiar with the K-12 space, is the enrollment and the quality of the educational experience that the post-secondaries are offering. That same StatsCan survey found that like 90% of PSE courses have moved online. Judy, and I'm telling you something that obviously you're really familiar with. And students, because of that affordability issue, are really trying to decide if a semester or maybe even a full year, if doing that online is the right thing for them. And so that's a huge concern for the post-secondary, for the institutions, especially when, we're looking now at a significant percentage, 20 to 25 to 30% of those courses potentially being canceled because of enrollment issues. So those are the two I would highlight as probably, front of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good points. Simon, what have you noticed as implications on the post-secondary and secondary systems?
Yeah, so much like what we talked about, before around some of the skills, a lot of the challenges that post-secondary and secondary faced are not necessarily specific to the pandemic. I would argue that the pandemic has accelerated or kind of magnified some of the cracks. So a couple of things that come to mind when I think about just the perspectives I hear from our various partners in our coalition, which are academic, private, public sector organizations, is really just that need for closer partnership between the education institutions and the employers. I think we can all agree that the environment around us is changing dramatically and is changing very quickly. So in order to actually continue to prepare students, not only for life, but for work, that greater partnership and that need for applied learning in that working environment, I think will become more critically important. I don't need to tell, obviously, you and Val that, you guys are living it day to day. The other piece I think is an implication is to redefine our view of students. I think we have tended to view students as, people who are, say 18 to 23, and they're people who are doing their undergraduate, et cetera. I think we've talked about this notion of continuing to keep pace, and how do we help folks who are, mid-career continue to learn and keep pace as things change. Well, COVID has created more and more ambiguity. It's disrupted more markets, and so there's that greater need for one to reskill and upskill and have shorter bursts of learning beyond that traditional view of an early stage student. So how do we work together to build those learning interventions that are shorter in nature, that fit with someone who is mid-career, and how do we build skills in a more incremental way so that people can keep pace? I think COVID has magnified that, and that's a major implication and an opportunity, quite frankly, I think, for the post-secondary institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Katie, do you have thoughts on the implications for the educational systems?
So similar, I'm not overly familiar with it from an education perspective, but from an employment perspective, there's a couple of really interesting things that came out, similar to what Simon and Val were saying, that redefinition of what it means to be a student, either because my job has been eliminated, right, potentially as a result of the pandemic, or I realize that I want to do something different. Or the way that I want to think about my job is different. So how do we make post-secondary approachable? How do we redefine what it means to be a student is really important for us. us. And as Simon mentioned, that partnership between the private sector and academia is really important. So as we get short bursts of learning, it's in all of our best interests to come together to be able to upskill our communities.
Judine, I'm sorry. Can I jump in? It would be,
Absolutely.
my team will be grumpy with me if I don't mention the other point about the change as a result of COVID when it comes to post-secondaries. We know that about more than a third of work integrated learning placements over the summer and the projected placements for the fall have been canceled or changed. And so again, telling you what you know at Waterloo, but the dependence that students have on those opportunities to get real life work experience is critical. And when you're looking at, 35 or so % of students who had a job that they had been offered and committed to and then had it taken back because of obvious pandemic related reasons, that it's a big strain. And so groups like ours and others I know are trying to be creative in the ways to engage students in alternative forms of that access to work. So just need to get that in there.
Absolutely. And I would echo that, saying that, it really speaks to Simon and Katie's point about the importance of those partnerships between organizations and the workplaces in order to understand the long-term benefits both to students and those organizations of the students getting the experience early in their careers. And I would say from our perspective, Simon, you mentioned the Future Ready Talent Framework that we've developed. Certainly this the COVID pandemic has emphasized to students the relevance of that. We had that built before COVID-19, and yet I think some of the students may have thought we were off in dreamland, and all of a sudden it's become much more real for them. On top of that, we have our students take professional development courses, and that's been going on for more than 10 years at the University of Waterloo, where they take the human skills through online courses. And there again, the emphasis around students being able to learn in these different environments through these different formats has proven to be very important and valuable for their future. The other comment that I would make related to this is that I think it's up to us as educators within these systems to ensure that students are learning from the situation. So I was struck by comments made by students in our research studies this summer who said, it's about having a positive mindset and about understanding how what they're experiencing right now is unique, and they're going to be able to tell a story about how they contributed either through their academics or through the organizations that is going to pave the way and to be able to share a story about how they've benefited. So I'm always inspired by the words the students share with us.
I think, sorry, just to add,
Yeah.
I love this one, right? So I think that, the bringing that student mindset in that talent ready framework, I think for larger employers, I think the larger employers already have the resources and they're thinking about this type of stuff, right? And I think they have the resources to think through strategies of how to bring this mindset in, et cetera. And there tend to be more they have the resources to invest in new ways of thinking, innovative technology, et cetera. I think one of the big opportunities that for post-secondary is really around how do we provide access for those students to small to medium-sized companies. And I get it, the small to medium-sized companies don't necessarily have the time and energy and et cetera to be able to invest in that. But I think that, there's an interesting nut to crack there, I think, for us as a community to how do we work together to take the learnings collectively and package it in a way that small to medium-sized companies that may be chamber companies, right, that organizations that don't necessarily have those resources to be able to access student talent. Because I think about, a lot of our Main Street companies are the ones who are struggling, and they're the ones who are trying to figure out how to adapt to this environment post-COVID, having access to students, having access to the learnings and the thought processes of organizations who may have more resources to help them along, I think is a real opportunity for us as our community here in Waterloo Region, but also just across Canada. I think those are, small to medium-sized companies make up a big part of the economy. And so how do we help them, invest them to build a stronger workplace and a stronger community?
Yeah, completely agree. And I think that flows nicely into asking each of you for what your advice would be to employers on how to prepare for more employees working from home if that becomes more of the standard. Katie, maybe we can go to you.
Sure. So there's a couple of things that we think about, and when we've had conversations with our coalition members, small and medium-sized businesses alike, there's a couple of things that have started to emerge. So first, making sure that we have the base in place, right? So ergonomic setup, technology infrastructure, equipment, that type of thing, to make sure that you have the foundational stuff that you need in order to get your job done. Where it gets more interesting is how do we have team connection? How do we replicate that in-office experience at home? And so what does that look like? And you have to be more intentional from a teaming perspective, more intentional from a leadership perspective in order to build and maintain those connections as you would if you were all in the office together. The other interesting lens is that of diversity and inclusion. So arguably in some companies, right, you could be working from anywhere in the world. So that makes that D&I conversation, that curiosity, that human element of it really that much more important than it could have been potentially before in your organization. And last but not least, how do you have an impact, right? So talking really clearly about priorities, what we're going to focus on today. How do you make sure that you're having an impact so that when you shut your laptop down at the end of the day, you feel like you've contributed something, because that will likely be more important from a remote perspective than before. And the other piece we think about, particularly with our small and medium businesses, is that commute. So can you instead use that time when you'd be sitting in the car or riding your bike to work, whatever that looks like, doing something that makes you physically active and mentally well and mentally fit. So just trying to find new patterns and new routines in your home life.
That rounds that out nicely. Very, very good advice. Val, do you have advice for employers who continue to bring employees from home?
My advice is take Katie's advice. That was an excellent answer, very thorough. The only thing I would add to that is a reminder that it isn't business as usual, right? And that line between home and work was already starting to blur, this work-life balance. I've heard the term, probably more appropriate to use, work-life blend. Like, what's that blend? Because it's not actually an either or, but especially now that so many people are working from home, that's very blurry. And coming back to the idea of being empathetic, I was chatting with someone the other day who said they just talked to their director, and the director had said, look, I get that you're dealing with a lot. You've got kids that are about to go back to school. That's very uncertain. You have your partner at home with you. I hear you. I recognize what you're going through. But also this thing is still due by Friday at 5. So it's one thing to say it. And it's another thing, to Katie's point, of putting the processes and actual, implement the actual change to make it more than just words. And that's really hard to do, but has to happen depending on how long we last in this kind of online environment.
Yeah, no, I like that work-life blend. Simon, what advice do you have?
I would go with Val, listen to Katie, that usually is my life mantra these days. But I think intentional is a really good, a word that we should be really thinking about, because I don't think we should be making assumptions, right? I think we tend to, in an in-person world, you can make assumptions about what people know and what they don't know. And you have the opportunity to have those serendipitous bump-ins and coffee walks and things of that nature to get people kind of realigned to what your priorities are. So I think being intentional and transparent about what the priorities are. So if there are places where people can go that are central to, what's the top 3 priorities that a particular squad that you work with is working on, right? How do you create kind of centralized places for people to see other teams' priorities, obviously your own priorities? I think those are important because it's very easy to just get, stuck in your little bubble that you operate in. And so again, back to that systems thinking, there's, we look for those traits for people who will try to connect the dots and go across business units or across the community to find out what's going on. We can't make the assumption that everybody's going to do that. So what are the things that we can be intentional about to be able to help people find the information they need to be able to help them connect the dots? I think that's, the piece I would add to the other great advice that Katie and Val have provided.
Wonderful. Thank you. Katie, maybe we'll come back to you on what factors do we need to consider in determining over the long term whether we want to keep employees remote or have them return to the office?
Yeah, it's a fair thing. And, it's something, Judine, that every employer that I'm talking to and every community member is trying to grapple with, whether you're public, private, small or big. It's something that we're all trying to figure out together. And what's interesting is I don't know that there's one right choice. It's a couple of different factors that we tend to consider as I'm listening to my colleagues in the market. One is highly personalized, right? There's some colleagues who are working from home and it's driving them bonkers and they just want to get back to the office. They want to get back to that routine, that they had before. And there's others who are saying, hey, this work from home thing, it's kind of working for me, right? So as Val said, that blend, it's better for me when I'm at home. So there's that highly personalized choice, especially as we're in the pandemic, where apprehension and anxiety is a little bit higher before we think about getting back to work. So there's that personalized element. The other piece from an organizational and a team perspective is, what do we choose to believe? What do we choose to believe from a creativity perspective? Is it as good or not when people are all remote or some remote? What do problem solving skills look like? What does team performance look like? There's all those pieces to it as well, because there will be, frankly, some roles and some organizations that make sense to have everybody back in, and others who can say, you know what, it's all right to be home. The tricky part for employers and communities alike is what's getting a lot of play in media right now is the companies who are making arguably drastic decisions to shut down their offices and have everybody working from home. Other employers who are making or choosing to believe something different, that's not getting as much media attention and making that conversation largely much more important, but more complex than it might otherwise be, because I think what the media is portraying is, frankly, you have a choice of A or B. And I don't know that that's the right answer for any of our organizations in our coalition or in our communities.
Yeah, agree. Not one size fits all for sure. So the concept of lifelong learning is something we've talked about for quite a while, but something that has sort of taken on a new life or new importance in the Canadian workforce in light of COVID-19 and the other trends that are predicted for the future of work. Simon, maybe you could start us off in describing what lifelong learning means to you and its impact on the Canadian workforce.
Yeah, so I think about in models and in Katie and Val, you probably have heard me talk about, the changes in kind of the phases and stages of life. I think that if we look at, the model that probably still is viewed as commonly in existence is kind of that 3-stage life of, like, you go to school for your first 25 years, you work for 40 years, and then you retire at 65 and you go into retirement. And I don't think that's really relevant anymore for a couple of reasons. One is just the pace of change that we've talked about. But the other one is just longevity. People are living to, ages of 90 to 100. And so if you think about that increased longevity combined with the need to continue to keep pace, when you put those two together, what you see is that you're going to have to deal with multiple shifts, significant shifts within a lifetime, whereas 100 years ago you would have had multiple lifetimes to adapt to a big change in technology, et cetera. And so when it comes to lifelong learning, the way I think about it is really, you can't dine out or just live off of your 4-year degree or diploma. That era is over with. And I think individuals need to see themselves much less as finished products, but more as software that requires continual version upgrades. And the idea is, how do we help? I think lifelong learning is really about helping organizations and people understand and sense what are the things that are emerging. What do I need to pay attention to, and what do I need to continue to focus on to keep those versions and upgrades going? And that process of version upgrades is going to happen throughout my lifetime, versus having just the one download in university or college. And then heading off into the workforce and being able to maintain that for the rest of my career.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to describe it. The software updates. Val, can you talk to us? A significant discussion has started and continues across Canada related to broadband access for rural areas. What impact does this lack of service have when we're thinking about skills development, lifelong learning, the impacts of COVID on the Canadian workforce and our overall national economy?
Yeah, you know what? It might not be obvious to people listening or watching this that we're talking about broadband and a conversation about the future of work and responding to COVID, but it's honestly, it's a thing that we think about at Be Her all the time. We were already worrying about how to make the access to upskilling or reskilling for current employees equal for everyone in this country. Access and being equitable were already important concepts and principles, but I think what's happening here is we're creating, we're at least more aware of this digital divide that exists in this country. So while it's true that about 85% of Canadians have access to broadband, what goes unsaid after that stat is that actually 40% of Canadians living in rural and remote areas do not. And so while we think about moving not just work, but school to an online environment that has enough requirements in terms of bandwidth, that broadband is absolutely now an essential requirement, we really do need to think hard and fast about it. And the government recently has made some investments in that and announced them, but I think that this is going to be critical in order to maintain to have everyone have the ability to adapt and change and learn, so that we don't further the divide between the haves and the have-nots. And if you give me a chance, I'll just give you one very specific example. I have an employee who's actually on mat leave right now and is thinking about childcare so that she can come back to work in the new year. And childcare is an issue, especially now with COVID. Her parents live just outside of Brighton, and they offered to take care of her little one so that she could be there with them and also work. And where they are, they don't have access to broadband. They're just on the wrong side of a hill. Right. So she actually can't take advantage of the offer that she's lucky to have in terms of her parents as a caregiver, just because of where that house is and the access needed to broadband. So it's really, really critical. And I'm glad the government's starting to take some steps, but I think we need to do more.
Yeah, and I think you're right to point out that that the future of work and learning is tied to something as pragmatic as access to broadband. So yeah, I agree that it's good that the government is looking at it, and important that we continue to put pressure on, particularly in the thought around accessibility and for all, and the haves and the have-nots. So
absolutely.
I would like to end there and thank each of you for taking the time to participate in today's panel. I've gained a great deal of insight from the ideas that you've shared about how your organizations are adapting and preparing for the predicted challenges related to the future of work and learning, also the predicted opportunities. It was also very helpful to hear about your thoughts on the ways that people and organizations across Canada can be thinking about the role that they can play in this future of work and learning. So thank you.
Happy to be here.
Thank you, Judine, Katie, Simon, and Val. I hope everyone's enjoyed the discussion so far. Good morning, my name's Adam Smith, and I am the chair of the board here at the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. I'm grateful to live within Canada's innovation corridor and to hear about the incredible initiatives that are already taking place and which will set up our communities for continued growth and prosperity. This marks the first break of the day. Please use the next 10 minutes to refill your coffee or to enjoy a much needed stretch. Towards the end of the break, the main stage will reopen for part 2. Please hop over to the main stage to the left of your screen to continue along with us. Remember, you can visit the reception page at any time to see what's coming up next. Thanks for taking part in this, and I hope you enjoy the rest of our summit.